Cool. Well, welcome everybody. We're here today to talk about taxonomy for Atomic UX. My name's Daniel Pidcock. I am a UX designer and researcher. I'm credited at least with the creator of Atomic UX Research. The truth is many people have been a part of that and many people have been involved in the creation of that. And today we're going to talk specifically around taxonomy. And as I was mentioning earlier, taxonomy for Atomic has some specifics, but also hopefully some of the things I'm going to be speaking to you about today will be useful in other areas as well. There are definitely some crossovers with taxonomies, and hopefully that's good news as well. If you already have an existing taxonomy, hopefully it won't be too much of a ask to be able to convert it. So what I'm going to go through today is, first of all, define what atomic and taxonomy are separately so we can understand those together. What we need to be able to start the process of creating a taxonomy. Talk about specifically how taxonomy works across the atomic flow, and then the process of getting started, defining and refining the taxonomy as well. And you're very quickly going to get sick of me saying taxonomy again and again. So first of all, what is Atomic UX Research? Now, probably a lot of you, if you're watching this, you already know. That's probably what brought you along today. But just as a reminder, and just in case there are a few people who haven't heard of that before, Atomic UX Research is a way of breaking down a piece of knowledge into its smallest components, which allows us to create, first of all, a better way of understanding our knowledge. It's a great synthesis tool, but it also allows us to create a scalable and connected research repository as well. And that was in the outset what we were trying to do. So the atomic process starts with experiments. This is what we did to learn something. And we call those experiments, but really it's the source of our knowledge. So it might be as formal as an experiment. It's a fully designed experiment. It might just be something you overheard on a bus. Basically, it gives context for the facts. Now, facts are what we learned. What were the outputs? What were the things that maybe users have said to us, things we've observed? What's the data that we have had as we were doing our experiment? And the reason we call them facts is because they should be factual. What they shouldn't be ever is our opinion. There might be a summary of data, but we should try and keep them as fact-led and as unbiased as possible. And one of the reasons for that is insights are our opportunity to have an opinion on why the data is the way it is. As Marielle de Gies has put it, what's the cause and what's the effect of that data. And it's also the connection between the facts and the recommendations. So it's very easy to say, the user said this, so we're going to do that. By defining the insight, it helps us understand why that's the case. And so recommendations are the actionable next steps of what's come before. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop into chat a little link, which is to a video specifically about Atomic. So if you'd like to learn more about that, if this is something you haven't heard of before, you might want to pause here and go and understand atomic research, the basic atomic research in a bit more detail. Because we're going to talk about taxonomy. And what is taxonomy? So taxonomy can be also broken down into 4 elements, I believe, and 4 different things we're trying to achieve with taxonomy. And the first is definition. We want to define what is the thing about. We also want to contextualize our findings and our knowledge. Who or what is the thing related to? Thirdly, we want to make it discoverable. Where is the thing? And how can other people find it? Or how can we find it ourselves even, right? And we also want to democratize the findings as well. And have a shared understanding. Okay, they're all very good in principle, but yeah, let's define that a little bit more. So if I can click on the right thing, we've got an insight here. Corporate customers are unable to find invoices in the footer navigation because they see invoices as related to their personal paid account rather than the product. So what we're seeing here is that people on our imaginary website are struggling to find their invoices they want to download, especially corporate customers. And they're looking, at the moment, it's currently in the footer navigation. And the reason they're struggling to find it there is because they're seeing invoices related to their personal accounts. They're going to their account looking for invoices and not able to find it. Okay, so if we were going to break this up and kind of into those elements that we just discussed there, define, contextualize, discover, and democratize, how would we do so? So I would say that we could define as this insight as being about the ability to find invoices, or the lack of ability to find invoices. We could contextualize it as it's corporate customers that are unable to find it, and it's because it's in the footer navigation rather than the product section. We can also make this democratize the understanding by summarizing it as like invoices are related to their personal paid account. And we can also add other coding to make it easier to discover these elements as well. So if I was looking for something around customer support, after sales, perhaps things that are high priority or really easy, quick wins for us to solve, these might be elements that would help me discover this particular insight. Now, you may be very rightly arguing right now and shouting at the screen. Actually, I think some of those things are actually defined rather than contextual. Some of those are also democratized as well. And actually, you're probably right in saying that. Some of these elements, I struggled a little bit when I was putting the screen together, because actually some of these fall into most of those. It's very much a Venn diagram between them, right? But hopefully it just kind of helps you understand what I mean by each of those four pillars. So if we want to start a taxonomy, there's a few things we need in our organization before we begin. The first is alignment. If we're all using different terms and methods of classification, then there's not going to be any mutual understanding. And that means that we won't be able to democratize, we won't be able to do the discoverability side. People won't know what we mean, and they won't be able to find things, and where we'll and there will be it will keep knowledge siloed. The next thing we need is engagement. And to get in alignment, we need people to engage in the process. So we can have an understanding of both what taxonomy for each part of the organisation needs, as well as what they mean by different terms. We were talking to a customer actually just before this call, and I was using the example of Apple. This is an organisation that was a fashion brand. They've got clothing, they've got makeup, they've got fragrances. So you can imagine that Apple could refer to red apple colour, right, for clothing. It could refer to the fragrance smell of apple, or flavour if they have any flavoured cosmetics or something like that. It could refer to body shape, right? So all of these ways of using the term apple are correct, and we can't expect any of those particular teams to say we will stop using that term. What we need to do is come to an alignment about how we can define those terms as well. And to do that, we'll need engagement to create a useful taxonomy. And we also need engagement when it comes to its use. If they don't use the taxonomy, if they go off rogue and start using different terminology outside of that, it's going to have the same issue. Now, obviously, that probably will happen, and we'll have to engage with them to... let me go over here. We'll have to engage with them so we can solve those problems as well. And to that end, we actually need to be flexible. We need to recognise where our taxonomy isn't working for them. When they aren't engaging, when they aren't in alignment, is that because they're being difficult? Or is it more likely actually because there's issues with the taxonomy and we're making life difficult for them? So we need to be reactive and collaborative to ensure that the tools we're providing actually work for the people that we're building with them for, right? That isn't to say we should change things on a team's whim. Once again, we'll end up with a lack of alignment. Every team is different, but they need to buy into the fundamentals and engage for into the benefit. And this might mean you need to do some work around that. You might need to sell the benefits. We can't just go off on our own, create a taxonomy and expect everyone else to go, yes, sir. You know, they need to be bought into it. They need to be involved. And actually, one of the best ways we can get buy-in is actually getting involvement as well. And that's how we're going to get engagement. So rather than shouting loudly why we're doing this, and they better comply, explain why we're doing this, how it will benefit, why it's worth the investment of time and effort. And I think I pulled out this quote from the REOPS community. This is actually, I don't know exactly who wrote this particular line. This is an article on minimum viable taxonomy from the REOPS community. And there's several different authors there, which all of whom are probably involved in this wording. And it says here, a well-developed taxonomy is not only about documentation organisation, it makes it possible to create opportunities for new discoveries. It can bring meaningful connections and drive conversations outside of discrete products. I'm going to try that again, discrete projects and teams. It's a bit of a mouthful. But I think it's really beautifully put as well, right? And when we organise things in a way that most people in your organisation can understand, it can bring about serendipity, creating the stage for patterns and new patterns to emerge and take shape. I love that because it's so much of what I see, not just regarding taxonomy, but regarding a repository at all, right? One of the biggest values to a good quality repository, in my experience and in my opinion, is that it becomes an object for the organisation to come around. Yes, it shares understanding, it records all our knowledge, it means we're not losing stuff to the ether, but one of the most beautiful things is it starts conversations between people, right? And new discoveries happen, but it also drives conversations. It does mean that one team will discover another team has either worked on a problem before or is currently actively working on that, and they'll engage with each other, they'll start talking to each other, and when humans talk to each other, wonderful things happen. And that leads to one more thing that we need, perseverance. And this will take time to get right. We'll have a few false starts, and you might find some teams will stick their heels in the ground and need more help and encouragement than others. And going back to REOPS, this is another quote from them. Persevere and trust yourself. Stay committed and have confidence in your abilities and the process. And one way we can get that perseverance and that engagement is by keeping the barriers to entry low. So if you've been to my previous talks before, you may have noticed I often tell people it's better to get poorly coded research into your repository than risk you losing it. After all, if it's not there, it will never be found. And it's one of the beauties of Atomic is actually for traditional insight repositories that rely heavily on coding and tagging, this is a problem. If it's not tagged, it doesn't exist. As far as the system is concerned, like it's not there. However, with Atomic, when we connect a fact to an insight or an insight to a recommendation, we're creating relationships. We're kind of coding via stealth. And in this example here, each of these items is connected. And though those facts aren't properly coded, we probably will find them if we find that insight, that recommendation, or any of the other assets that they're connected to. What we find in an Atomic repository is normally things are connected within just a few steps. So we can lower our barrier of entry. We can start small with our taxonomy, try and keep things simple, but watch out. The red flag is people aren't using it, people aren't understanding it, people are struggling with it. And the good thing about Atomic is it kind of reduces the amount of pressure you need to have on yourself to get that right. I have seen whole, large, valuable repositories built in the Atomic model that don't have any taxonomy, so to speak, have no tagging, no coding. Now, if they did, they'd work better. They'd have more value. Things would be more discoverable. And I am not undervaluing the power of taxonomy. But one of the wonderful things about Atomic is things are connected in a very human matter. And because of that, we can take it one step at a time, put less pressure on yourself, put less pressure on your team. So next, let's talk about taxonomy specifically for Atomic. Now, this is our Atomic UX research cheat sheet. A big shout out to Mara de Gies, who I mentioned earlier, who did a lot of thinking around that. One of the things I love the most is her definition of an insight having cause or effect. We'll talk about that again in a second. So this can be downloaded and kept, and there's a QR code there. I'm going to pop a link into the chat. Let me just copy and paste that. I'm not good at doing two things at once. I need someone I need a producer, I think. I need someone here helping me. So here we go. So what we're going to do now is go through each layer of the atomic process and talk about what makes a good taxonomy. So first, experiments. As I said before, this is what we did to discover the knowledge. It's also the most commonly changed terminology as well. So you, in terms of taxonomy, you might want to refer to this as something else. Some people like to call this source or activity or study is a good one as well. So feel free to change the terminology. What works for your organisation is the right thing to do. Okay. And experiments are unusual as well in that they almost are a taxonomy in themselves. They're giving context for the facts. So you could almost do away with experiments as a layer. We find it useful as a grouping for facts to go in Gleanly. But that grouping is still a taxonomy of types. And we've often looked at creating folders of experiments, but actually the most useful way to do that is through taxonomy, through filters, as we use on Gleanly. So let's talk about what makes a good experiment taxonomy. So experiment classifications, first of all, should aid discovery. When we're looking for an experiment, we need to be able to find it either through the type of experiment or what we were studying or who we were studying. And it also needs to provide context for the facts, how those facts were learnt. And that's the reason that facts belong to an experiment. You can't extract an experiment and a fact because how that fact was learnt is intrinsic to the fact itself, right? So in that regard, the experiment gives context to the facts. The experiment is taxonomy to the facts as well. So we need to think about that. So some things to consider. Methodology. What did we do? What tools, what processes did we use to learn that information? Where did that information come from? If you're working in an organisation that has products or departments, services, or maybe different countries as well, were you studying a specific product or were you studying a particular demographic? What platform were you studying, like web or app or perhaps in-store? What department, team or client? Subject matter, objective. What was it, what we were trying to get out of this? One of the things I like to include in the description of an experiment is as a hypothesis, what we were trying to solve. We believe that X equals Y. We will know that if we see this. And that's a really good way for people to understand what it was we were trying to get out of an experiment. And what you're studying does influence what you learn very much, right? It maybe we'll discover things outside of that, but what we did and how we were going about it is so relevant. So yeah, subject matter and objective is really good. Date's another one as well. How old is this research? There may be other mitigating factors as well that you might want to bring in. Especially, for instance, if you are studying a prototype, for example, and that's something you might want to take through to other layers as well. So next, facts. Facts are what we learned. So a good fact is a quote, an observation or a statistic, but it's never our opinion. Okay. We got good examples here of some as well. So one of the things you might find useful in the cheat sheet is it gives some examples of how to build a fact. And what I am thinking of doing, put into the chat if you think this is useful. What I haven't got in the cheat sheet at the moment is taxonomy tips. So I think that maybe needs to be combined and maybe we need to expand that a little bit. So if we do, I'll let you know if we update that. So what makes good taxonomy for facts? So classifications for facts should give context, right? Who was it who was saying this? What were we doing when we were studying them? Where did this data come from? If it's more quantitative data rather than qualitative, what tools did we use? What's the source? What was the date and what was the parameters in which we found that data? Now, some of this information may be in the fact itself. It doesn't need a separate taxonomy, but what we really suggest is similar to the REOPS idea of a minimum viable taxonomy. If we have specific coding that everyone should use where appropriate, so we always have sentiment where sentiment is available. We always have platform, is platforms relevant? And then anyone who does research in your organisation and records research in your organisation should be encouraged to follow that kind of practice each time. The only one I didn't mention there was journey, and journey is something you can almost have all the way across in a lot of places. Now this will be more specific to your particular world. So insights, as we said earlier, insight is what we think the facts are telling us. What's the cause of those? What's the effect on us? And when we're writing an insight, a really good insight has the context, the cause, and if we have effect, right? So cause and or effect. What we try to avoid is just using an insight as a way of summarizing the data. You, of course, can do that, but I find it's most useful when we also go, this is what we found, and this is why we think that is, and what we think the effect of that is, okay? And of course, that can often have a big influence on the classification and the taxonomy as well. So, for example, we would likely want to have a type when we have an insight. What I mean by that, and you can see some examples, is principle, strategic, prototype, obsolete, and assertion or hypothesis. What do each of those mean? So principle is an insight that affects the whole organization. A strategic insight is specific to maybe a particular team or feature, but it's guiding our wider thinking. Whereas a tactical insight is more likely to be specific just to be that part of the experience or that feature, such as like the position of a button or something like that. So sometimes it also can be a really useful thought process as well when you're creating an insight to go, right, I've just got an insight there that's very tactical, the button's in the wrong place, we should move it. This is why it's in the wrong place for this particular thing that we're working on. Okay, well actually, can I create a principle out of that? Maybe it's in the wrong place because of the reading direction. So we could say our insight is for people in the West or people who read left to right, that influences where you place a call to action. It should always be placed on the right because people look diagonally. Perhaps in Arabic countries or other countries where they go the opposite way, right to left, the direction would be different. Yeah, so that can be a really useful way, I think, of zooming out a little bit. It can be quite easy when you're creating insights, either be too high and we're not being specific enough, or more often I see people creating lots and lots of tactical insights, and occasionally it's worth stepping back and going, okay, but what is the real human element in here? Can I create something more principle out of this? We can also have, I'm going to skip over obsolete at the moment and come back to that in a second, but we can also sometimes have insights that aren't necessarily backed up by the data. So it could be that perhaps we have some quantitative data that leads us to think that something is true. But it's just a hypothesis. Very rarely does quantitative data like A/B tests or stuff coming out of Google Analytics, it can be really useful to show us that there is something there and we might have ideas of what it means, but it doesn't answer the why, it just tells us the what. So we can see customers are dropping out at this point, but we don't know why. But I've got an idea of why I think that is, and I can record that as an insight. I can record that as mark it as a hypothesis, so it's clear to other people the data doesn't support this right now. And that's my indication also that I should go and look for other data. I need to go and find whatever method or source that is that either proves or disproves my hypothesis there. I hope that makes sense. Now, once we've, for tactical insights particularly, they can quite quickly become obsolete. That's less true for principal ones, but it can happen, and strategic ones as well. So if we say, yeah, the button's in the wrong place because of that, okay, but now we've moved the button. What we don't want to do is delete insights. We don't want to delete any data if at all possible, because otherwise people come in the future and go, why is the button on the right? It should be on the left, move it, and then it fails again. Okay, no, we moved it over there because we found this reading direction thing. Okay, it's done now. It's no longer relevant, but it's still there and discoverable for people. But we might say, or maybe if that feature doesn't exist anymore, that button's removed, okay, it's obsolete now. We don't need that insight, but we still want to record it. We still want to keep that information there and still make it available to people. Other things that might be useful as well is so people can find insights that are relevant for them, things for their particular department, product, service, the product, the country that they're working in, the type of part of the journey, and also opportunities are a really good one. So if you think of opportunity like conversion or onboarding or after sales, I mean, they could be also be seen as journey, I suppose. But yeah, we need to improve this part of organisation, or we've got this particular opportunity. We've discovered that people really love this particular, we've found all our customers are well into cats. Okay, so we've got an opportunity to really appeal to cat owners here. How do we go about it? So how can I find insights around that idea? Another thing to say as well is when it comes to taxonomy, that could be a signal where it's been tested. So let's say I've done some research, I've discovered something interesting, but I've done that research in the UK. Okay, I would want to mark that insight as being tested in the UK, and then maybe we'll retest that in France, in Italy, in Spain. Okay, cool. I can see all that on there. And then someone comes along and goes, okay, I can see you found this insight. It's solving a lot of problems for you in Europe, but my audience is in Japan. They might say, okay, look, this helps me understand how this was solved in those European countries, but obviously my audience is culturally quite different, but still all humans at the end of the day, right? So they might want to retest that. And then, of course, when they test it and they see whether it works or it doesn't work, they can add Japan on there as a tag as well. Say this is true for Japan. If it's not, they'd want to record a separate insight for that. Now, I talked about creating hypothesis, and if you've seen one of my talks before, like the fundamentals of atomic research, you may be already aware of this, but just as a reminder, we don't need to start with experiments, go through facts, insights and recommendations all the time. It is possible actually to start with a hypothesis and work backwards. So if someone's come to you and said, I've got an idea for a new product, we call that as a recommendation. Something actionable, it should be recorded as a recommendation. If someone comes to you and says, I think our customers prefer cats to dogs, okay, that's not actionable, but it's still useful to record as an insight, but it's just a hypothesis or an assertion at the moment. And what we can do is work backwards. If we've got that evidence already that that either proves or disproves their ideas, then fantastic. We probably need to go out and do more research. We probably need to create experiments, facts that support insights or disprove insights, and those insights support or disprove the recommendations. But what we want to do before we've got that research is mark it as a hypothesis. Show that this is starting with an idea and we're working backwards. Moving on to recommendations. Recommendations are the actionable next step. And what we find with the taxonomy for this is it's very often around, it's kind of very project managery type ones, context, status, prioritization. The context, it's all the way through, right? We want to give people context of what they're talking about. If we should have it in a well-written recommendation, it should be fairly clear what that applies to. But you might want to include things like, for insights and recommendations, like the version of the product you're working on, whether it's a prototype or not, or if it is a live product. This was version 2.6. Okay, we're on version 3 now, and that feature is very different. So that's useful. As much as possible, include screenshots and videos and things like that, so people see at a glance what you're talking about. It's not really taxonomy, but it's all context, right? And context is everything. So recommendation taxonomy tends to be quite project managery, as I say, kind of context, status, prioritization. So some status things you might want to consider is unactioned. This is a recommendation that is awaiting a decision maker to make a decision on. When they have a look at that, a decision maker might say, well, actually, there's not enough evidence here, or the evidence you've got hasn't given me enough confidence to be able to make this decision. And so they might mark it as more evidence is needed. If there is enough evidence there, but they don't like the idea, the evidence is not kind of, it pushes them away from making that decision. Let me reword that. My brain stopped halfway through that sentence there. So if we have a recommendation that a decision maker is looking at, or if we're a decision maker ourselves, we might look at it and go, no, this is not a good idea, and reject that. Or they might love it, the evidence is there to support it. They're really excited and they give it a stamp of approval. Now, of course, once it's approved, it's going to go into the product management flow and eventually, hopefully, it will be completed. Once it's completed, we might need to retest it. So that might be a signal to a researcher to go and see if that change that or that new product, whatever it was, the recommendation was, let's see if that worked, if it did the thing. And once again, as we did with insights, we might want to record hypothesis as well and make it really clear that this is an idea or it started with an idea. Sometimes I see organisations will leave hypothesis on an insight or recommendation, even when it's got lots of evidence behind it, to show this idea came about as the result of a hypothesis. And I kind of agreed with that for a long time, because it still is a bias that we started with the idea and then worked backwards to find evidence for it. What I've started to find more recently, though, is perhaps hypothesis is a good signal when I'm looking at something to go, we don't actually feel this is ready to make a decision on. We're still working. We kind of have evidence that is leading us to think that this is a thing, but we haven't answered this question yet. So it's almost like a message from the researcher, whoever's doing the evidence gathering, to the decision maker, going like, this is still just an idea at the moment. It's not ready for decision and prioritization. So whether this, for the prioritization side, this may be the researcher, it might be a product manager, or those kind of people who would choose the impact, confidence, ease and effort. So that's like how big of an effect it will have on the product or the customer, the amount of confidence they have for it. Obviously, we've got all of that evidence, but it can be useful, I think, especially for researchers to go, there's not a lot of evidence, but it's really strong. Or we've got lots and lots of evidence, but actually, do you know what? It's still a little bit of a guessing game. So confidence is a really nice one to have. Ease and effort is a good one as well. How difficult is this going to be able to apply? Now, that might be something a product manager or developers or whoever involved in actually delivering that would have to answer. Another one that I don't seem to have on there is priority in terms of how important it is. You know, is this a critical thing? Is this fairly low? Is this fairly kind of we find quite often we see that there's recommendations that we've got lots of evidence for, and the reason we've got lots of evidence for it is because it's something that customers are always moaning about, but because it's fairly low impact, and it doesn't really affect anyone, it's not blocking anybody, it sits there for a while. So, that could be useful as well. The rest here are more to do with context. So what product services apply to, what journey, what opportunity, what team. Now, we had team for experiment, right? So in that regard, it was being the team who did the experiment or the experiment was done for. In this case, this will be the team that actually wants to carry this out or will be expected to carry this out if the decision is approved. So we've gone through each of the different layers there and talked about possible taxonomy for each of them. But what do we need to actually, if we wanted to get started? We've talked about what we need to have before we start using the thing, start applying a taxonomy. But what would be the next steps if we wanted to actually get started with this? So first of all, we need to get endorsement, right? If our senior leadership, whoever's in charge, aren't behind this, then we're not going to have the space to get started. We also might need time and budget. So we're going to need those in charge to be in support. We talked about getting the support from the wider organisation as well, and that's number 3. But in this case, this is actually getting the permission to even do this in the first place. Talking to support, we need to build a team. Maybe you can do this on your own if it's a small organisation, but ideally, even if you're going to be in charge of this, it's worth bringing people around you to help. If you've got a research team, they're good people to turn to. If not, look to your UX and design and product team for help. They're likely the people in the organisation are most likely to get it and be behind this endeavour. And then, as I said earlier, we need to sell the dream to the wider organisation. Why are we doing this? Why are we going to take up some of their time? Why is this worth investing in? Why is this worth them engaging? And then the next step, quite simply, start talking to people, do what we're good at as UX people, as research people, understand their different roles, their different departments, and how that influences into the taxonomy. One of the things you'll probably discover out of this, and this may be one of the things you can use when you're trying to get endorsement from the senior leadership, is probably this is actually going to be a time when you start spotting other patterns. When you're talking to different teams about taxonomy, you may discover other problems, whether it's direct related to research and UCD. It might be there are more other issues in the organisation, but it's certainly a good time as well just to build that relationship between research and those particular teams you're talking to. So once we've actually started with our initial taxonomy, the next thing we need to do is start defining it. So we need to find the categorizations that make sense to all in the organization. So I talked about earlier about products, services, teams, departments, those kind of things, but perhaps they don't make any sense in your organizations. What other useful shared terms do you have? Do they talk in terms of journeys and opportunities and features, or do they have different ways of thinking about it? A really key one is looking out for synonyms. I talked about Apple earlier. What are the different ways that different parts of the organization use the term Apple? I was working with a team, consulting with a team a couple of months ago, and I noticed they had the same acronym in the same team 3 times. So let's say it was ABC. ABC meant 3 different things in one team, and I was like, oh my lord, we're going to have to do some work around this, right? So so synonyms. Look out for times where people are referring to the same thing but they've got different terminology. And look out for polysemes. It's when they're using the same word but in different contexts, which is the thing I was talking about with that acronym ABC as well. And also we need to find shared definitions that work, because once we've got a word and we define it, that definition itself needs to make sense, right? So once we've defined it, once we've got this taxonomy rolled out, we need to refine as we go. And this is something that's going to be ongoing. This will be an active thing that you'll be doing all the time. We need to test this. We need to review this. There's also certain flags we can look out for, red or green, that we can look out for to see when people are struggling with it, or we might need to get involved. For instance, we might see new terms that need to be added, either because they started doing research in different areas, or there's new products or new things they're working on, and we'll discover those as we go along. We might find that actually some of those terms that need to be merged into existing ones, and people are creating new terms for things that already exist. We might want to redefine existing ones. We might find they're too broad or incorrect, and we might need to change those as we go. And also we should look out for misuse. If people are using the wrong term in the wrong place, and that isn't something we should just hit them over the head about. As I said earlier, maybe there's good reason for that misuse. Maybe that definition isn't clear enough. Maybe it's just a case that it's not a useful definition at all. So we should look out for that. Maybe they just need some training as well. Maybe it is something they're doing wrong, but we can help them understand why that is the case and how they can change it. Remember, in most people's situations, the only time they've ever seen a tag is in Twitter or Facebook, right? Or Instagram, and very rarely is that being used for classification. So we shouldn't expect people outside the research community to understand this. And one of the most important things we can do is encourage engagement. So if people are working on a new thing or that needs new classification, they should engage with us. And if we're going around hitting people with sticks, probably they're going to avoid us, right? So and if we're hitting people with sticks, also the other thing that's going to happen is probably they're not going to be recording their research at all in your repository. A key reason we see people not engage with a repository is because the barriers to entry are too high, because the team is so hyper focused on things being perfect, they forget that these teams have a lot of other work to do. But the major thing tends to be fear, right? It tends to be either fear of doing it wrong, but mostly embarrassing themselves, not really being hit with a stick, but just being kind of shown up as not really understanding this. And a lot of people don't understand it. As I say, it's a specialised area of research, and we expect a lot of people in organisation to record their knowledge, and they don't necessarily have the training that we do. And the biggest thing is advocate as well. If you can find teams where they've had successes, where this is really working for them, hold them up on a pedestal, create a case study out of it, share that with the team. Look out for people that are struggling, but also look out for those that are succeeding and really shine a light on them as well. So as we said before, these were the four things we need: alignment, engagement, flexibility, and perseverance. And I'm just going to go back to this quote here from Reops community, from that article I showed you earlier. Persevere and trust yourself, stay committed and have confidence in your abilities in the process. It's a great article there. I really recommend having a look at it. And I'm going to turn to the chat to see if there's any questions and anything that people want to ask. Before then, I would also really love you guys, if you aren't already, to have a look at Gleanly. So if you're using Atomic, if you're interested in Atomic, or you're interested in building a community of knowledge in your organization, Gleanly is a tool that we built specifically around atomic research. It started because out of frustration that I wasn't able to do things with existing tools on the market. And I just really wanted a different way to show information in a useful way. And it's turned into a full-scale, massive repository used by some of the biggest companies in the world. I'm so proud of it. I'm so proud of the team that and all the work they've done, and some of the really exciting things that we got in the pipeline as well. We're rapidly improving it and bringing new features in as well. And I'm really excited about the future of it. So I really hope that if you are interested, you'd find some benefit in the tool itself. And there's a 30-day free trial, so feel free just to give it a go. If you wanted a demo, give us a shout. And I'll turn to the chat to see if there are any questions.